So the glide board. I'm just going to reiterate what I had said before about with respect to the board being up. So sometimes we will accommodate an exercise for strength with changing the glide board height. In that if I wanted to do an exercise here and I'm basically doing it like this, one hand's actually getting more resistance than the other. So I can bring the board up to a parallel position, and then I have equal weight distribution. So the other element is that it brings me to the position of where your hands are. Now, I'm a big believer of functional movement, as many of us are, and with functional movement, there's very little symmetry. So with that said, one of the nice elements is that when I am adjusting or altering strength, I would like to know, what does that person do if I give them a load that isn't fully symmetrical? So what happens if I actually have them do a push-up where one hand is down a little bit more loaded than the other? What do I see right to left? Now, with that said, if I'm doing a movement pattern with someone, and again, I'm right there with them and I'm doing some hand mobilizations as they move or whatever it may be, I don't want to get up and leave them to go change the tower height. One of the nice elements is that if they're down here doing a move and they're doing some reaches and I see a fatigue but I want them to go, even just moving up the board just a little bit can actually make the exercise easier. Going back to that of the incline and the tower height, is that the higher you go when we were doing push-ups, that's actually the caveat rule, is that the easier that exercise becomes. So that's how sometimes I'm tweaking strength by adjusting a body position or what the board looks like. Now with respect to mobility, when we do a lot of exercises seated, facing away from the tower, well, oftentimes people naturally go right into their legs out straight and then they'll get the arm pulleys. This is a lot of hamstring. So if someone can do this, fantastic. Now as we discussed, raise the incline height, that will make it easier, but then that might be too much strength. So what we tend to do is we tend to tell people to straddle. And that's a simple, easy way with how to accommodate maybe someone having some hamstring tightness. Now, note that when you face the tower, you immediately have a lot more hamstring extensibility requirements. So many times I actually cue the patient to always start off straddled, because for the most part we're at an incline level that's a little bit higher and going to demand a little bit more flexibility. But maybe I want to also change one more thing about the board. Maybe they're still really tucked under. I see a lot of posterior tilt and they're doing these exercises. Again, a simple adjustment of the board where it becomes parallel. Maybe it becomes a little bit inclined and now you're accommodating. They can maybe even sit long sitting. So this adjustability factor is huge of how you use it to set a person up for success. Now, one of the nice features of the board is the fact that it can open and close. So it's moving. So we talk about an open and closed glide board a lot of times when we're talking about stability and creating some awareness. So for instance, with the roll up, I'll cue a lot of, can you pull the board under? So if I just see this and I feel like the board barely moves and their body's moving simultaneously, I know they're hinging. If I want to help really get that pelvic dissociation happening and get that rolling through, I'm going to use the glide board to my advantage and really cue that pulling down sensation. With that said, if I'm doing a movement such as a bridge, I can have the board all the way down at the bottom and bridge up and down. I can push back a little bit, have the board open, and come up and down. And while I'm in this position, it brings me to another element that's both stabilization and range and combines all the impairments in that how you position someone when they're lying on their back, when they're doing, let's say, squats, I'm very much toward the bottom edge of the board. Sometimes I even encourage a little bit of a drop to encourage that anterior tilt because they're so tucked under and they're really driving with their low back. So one of the things you can take advantage of is where they are positioned on the board when they're doing an exercise such as a squat, or or they're even doing a bridge. If I come to here, I'm asking a lot of hip and knee range of motion, and I'm asking someone to really drive themselves up from a very end of range motion. So in that case, I'll pull the board down and I'll have someone naturally stop, especially if I'm watching how far they might want to bend their hip or knee, and I'll make sure they're toward the top end of the board, and now the board's used as my regulator, and it's going to stop. The board's at the bottom, and then I can work on bridging here, or whatever it may be. When I walk my feet down and come up, they also have a little bit more room to roll up on, so they don't feel like they're going to roll off the edge, because that is something that you're going to have to teach your patients, that as you start to encourage them to be further down and challenge their range of motion and thus their strength, is that they have to get used to rolling up and pulling the board down simultaneously. So also another consideration with respect to how I utilize the glide board, how someone's sitting, or the movement pattern, is exactly that. Like, how are they sitting and what am I going for? So for instance, if I'm facing away or facing to, I talked about straddling, but when I'm facing to the side, I'm a little bit altered. And for some of my back or SI patients, that doesn't feel very nice. So one of the elements of bringing the board up to a parallel position is really great. Now with that said, the fact that you can be parallel and now perform a movement pattern with my feet down gives me some stability. So when I'm cueing side sitting, I always cue go wide with the legs, have your feet on the floor, eventually lift up. One of the hardest movements for me is as I bring my legs in together and then I perform a movement like torso rotation. Now I'm really narrowing my base of support. I can also challenge the base of support and overall stability requirements by altering how someone is on the glide board. So maybe I have them low kneeling, maybe I have them high kneeling, maybe I have it a little bit wider. And then I'm basically doing a same movement pattern, but now I'm tweaking that stabilization requirement of the participant. So, just to review, the board, as you move the board and you accommodate where someone's sitting, you may be influencing their hamstring extensibility, thus their strength, and thus their stabilization. So let's get started and talk about the arm pulleys next.